Shall we begin with a prayer? Blessed are you, Lord God, creator of all, visible and invisible. Come to our session and help us to understand your creation and how your word supports creation. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Is your video on?
Sorry. Yes. Okay, let's start. Okay, Johnny, here you are. So evolution is a fact. Okay? I'll grant you that evolution was once a theory, but it's evolved into a fact. And this is the situation in our classrooms. It's a fact. And there's poor little Johnny, or poor little Christina. And what does she have to say about this? She can't say anything, because there's this big authority figure telling her evolution is true. And that's why we believe evolution. Here's the picture. Okay, that's the picture. Materialistic origin of life, we're going to go over that today. Is it really evidence or faith? And this is Franklin Harold, professor of biochemistry and molecular biology at Colorado State. And in 2001 he wrote, "Life arose here on Earth from inanimate matter by some kind of evolutionary process about 4 billion years ago." Sounds like the Science Channel. This is not a statement of demonstrable fact, but an assumption almost universally shared by specialists as well as scientists in general. It's not supported by any direct evidence, nor is it likely to be. But it's consistent with what evidence we do have. What would you call this? That's a faith statement. Okay? Faith equals a religious statement. This is a philosophical and theological statement about the origin of life. And this really is what we have.
Certainly, the person certainly doesn't make it sound like a scientist.
Oh, he is.
He didn't say life made.
So, since we're here, evolution must have happened, and therefore we must have evolved because we're here. That is the philosophy of science. Okay?
Yeah, you can destroy their science because they refuse to say maybe it happened the way the Bible says.
It's not allowed. Remember the
scientists would have to
phrase?
say these are all the possibilities.
No, because they cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Remember that phrase? They all believe that. Okay, this is about John Horgan. This is a little publication called Scientific American. Okay, The Origin of Life. In 1953, Harold Urey, University of Chicago, and his graduate student Stanley Miller simulated, we talked about a simulation, didn't we? Simulated the primordial soup in which life supposedly began on Earth 4 billion years ago. And it talks about the flask and the methane, and he's apt it with a spark discharge. The flask soon was coated with a reddish goo. It was tars and amino acids. This famous experiment raised the hopes of many scientists. This is 1953, and this was why I became an atheist. That one of the nature's deepest mysteries, that is the origin of life, would soon be replicated in a laboratory and hence solved. Well, it hasn't worked that way. And in fact, the origin of life now appears so far improbable and mysterious. Francis Crick, remember old Francis, right? He was a co-founder of DNA. Said it was almost a miracle. It's so improbable, it's almost a miracle. Well, he wouldn't say it's a miracle. It's almost a miracle. By the way, Crick believes that aliens planted life on this planet. The creation model is, by him all things were created that are in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones, dominions, principalities, or powers. All things were created by him and for him. That's the statement of the Bible. And it says, he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. This is instantaneous. He commanded, and they were created. Okay, that's the model that stands in opposition to the other one. God created all life by divine fiat. And so God created all life in the original form, what we call kinds, by divine fiat. And created life, it appeared during creation week in mature form. Okay? Eve was We'll say she was 25 years old when she was created, poof. With the appearance of age and the ability to reproduce. Plant life on day 3. Water-dwelling and flying creatures on day 5. Land-dwelling creatures, day 6. The final creative act was Adam and Eve, day 6. And God ceased all creation at that point. The only thing that's created now are souls. After creating humanity, since then, God sustains creation. So the sustainment is natural law. In the church, you'll hear it called providence. Okay? It's the same thing. As God is upholding creation, put laws in place that govern, and that's what we're operating on now. So whatever God did in creation week, there's like an iron barrier that's between us and that, because whatever God did in creation week had nothing to do with the physical laws of nature. Okay? So if you look at the physical laws of nature and you try to run them backwards, you can't create, you can't duplicate that divine act of creation. And we're just not really sure that we can discern his creative methods. Obviously, we can't create anything. We can create life. A male and a female can create life. That's about what we can create. And that's a child, of course. So remember Jesus feeds thousands? Well, there's 2 stories. One feeds 4,000 and the other says 5,000. And Jesus affirmed Adam and Eve was created at the beginning. Jesus affirmed the historicity of Abel at the beginning. Jesus affirmed the historicity of Noah and the global flood. It was a cataclysmic wiping out of all life on the land. Jesus affirmed the historicity of Lot and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the interesting thing is Jesus worked his miracles instantly and immediately, just like the works of creation recorded in Genesis 1. Is we actually have recorded in the Bible acts of Jesus where he changed water into aged wine. The best wine is always aged, right? And so one second it was water, and Jesus looked at it, blessed it, and the next thing you know, it's wine. It wasn't, the people weren't hypnotized, it was wine. And if you say it's grape juice, fine. It was grape juice, but then you had to grow the grapes, right? Even if it wasn't aged. Some people argue it wasn't really wine. Well, he fed thousands several times, recorded in the Gospels, by creating cooked food of bread and fish. Didn't have to go fishing. Didn't have to let the fish spawn. Didn't have to smoke the fish. But there was the fish, and there were probably smoked fish. And bread. Didn't have to grow anything. Boom. It didn't even have to bake it. It's cooked. And if you read the Greek, it says, as he broke it apart, it uses the intensive form of the verb, which means he kept breaking apart, kept breaking apart, kept breaking apart. And every time he broke it apart, there was more. And so he kept creating as he was breaking it apart. That's what the Greek says. He healed the lifelong deaf, blind, and crippled. And that included the neural pathways and the learned abilities for sight, hearing, and walking, so they could do this instantly. You know how long it takes a baby to hear language and then to repeat it? And when you're injured and you have to go through therapy to learn how to walk, it takes weeks and weeks and weeks. Those people got up and the fellow got up and carried his pallet right away, his bed, instantaneously. It worked. And sighted individuals, instantly they knew who Jesus was. When they opened up, they opened their eyes for the first time in their entire life. They understood color and they understood shapes and forms. That was instantaneous creation of the entire nervous system in addition to the eyes. So Jesus demonstrated that he is creator. And the interesting thing, I left this down there, there are no contemporaneous witnesses who publicly denied and published anything about these acts. They're publicly denied. There are no, from extra-biblical sources, and there could have been, witnesses that said these things didn't happen. In fact, if you go to the Talmud says Jesus performed these acts of wizardry. They call them acts of wizardry. They said that they actually occurred. Okay, and that was a hostile source. Saint Basil the Great, he in 400 said, some had recourse to material principles and attributed the origin of the universe to the elements of the world, and he means the physical world. Others imagined that atoms, they're talking about atoms back at the first millennium, turn of the first millennium, and they're indivisible bodies, which what atoms mean, by the union formed in nature of the visible worlds. In other words, atoms collided together and formed the natural world. Deceived by the inherent atheism, it appeared to them that nothing governed or ruled the universe and that all was given up to chance. Your Japanese your Japanese theoretical physicist said that, didn't he? So the story hasn't changed in 2,000 years. During the first 4 centuries of the church, the apostles and all the fathers believed and proclaimed that much less than 6,000 years had passed from the creation of the world to the birth of Jesus. Creation took place in 6 24-hour days, or in an instant of time. Now, you understand that everything in the Bible is written from the reference of the earth and humans on the earth. So, if 24 hours really means a rotation, we don't know how long that rotation was. We assume that because the day is 24 hours, maybe it's 24 hours there. It could have been a little slower, it could have been a little faster. But when they say 24 hours, they just mean a day, not billion-year days. God immediately created all the different kinds of animals, instantly and immediately in full form. God created, Adam was created from the dust of the earth, and Eve from Adam. God split, took a piece of Adam and made Eve, so we actually are one, male and female. God ceased to create new kinds of creatures after the creation of Adam on the 6th day, and now creates souls at conception. And that the original sin shattered the perfect harmony of the first created world and brought human death, deformity, and disease into the world. That's the source of all our problems, which is us. Well, any questions on that? I mean, that's what your Bible says.
The atheists don't want to be blamed for anything, so they wouldn't buy that to begin with.
They wouldn't buy that, right. Okay. All right. So the unbroken witness of the church up to 1800 was this. We just presented. Now let's talk about the materialistic origin of life ideas. Okay? Here's the history of the origin of life ideas. In 600 BC, Anaximander, a philosopher and scientist, atoms collided randomly, eventually forming all things. This is called atomism. He's the one that formulated that philosophy. 500 BC, Democritus. Atoms collided randomly, eventually formed living things. In 300 BC, Epicurus, atoms collided randomly, eventually formed living things. 1859, Charles Darwin, atoms collided randomly, eventually formed the first living thing. What did he add? He added natural selection and the chemical soup concept. 1924, Alexei Oparin, atoms collided randomly, eventually formed the first living thing. He added chemical evolution. Okay? And proteins first. In 1953, Watson and Crick, the discoverers of DNA, they proposed that atoms collided randomly, eventually formed the first living thing. Things are really progressing here. They said DNA and proteins first. In 1953, the Miller-Urey experiment. Gee whiz, atoms collided randomly, eventually formed the first living thing, and they added, they didn't add anything. And in 1967, Carl Woese, he's the one that started the RNA world. Atoms collided randomly, eventually formed the first living thing, and what he added was, it started out with RNA. Okay. It's the same story. the explanations, the details in the explanations are slightly different, but it's still the same story. The atoms collided randomly and formed things that eventually turned into something living. It's a long history of the same story. So if you think it's modern science, all they've done is added some details. Okay. And the geologic record geologic column upon which all the science rests for the deep ages is really based on a flood problem. Okay, there was a flood, and a bunch of critters died in swirling sedimentary deposits worldwide. Well, what was that first living thing? This is a review. Well, it needed to have a blueprint, we call it DNA, some kind of decoding device, all right, to read the blueprint, a power plant to produce the energy. You just can't have an information processing machine without something for the machine to run on. An outer layer so it doesn't all dissolve, framing so it doesn't all smash together. It has to have some kind of agents in there, workers, organelles, whatever you want to call it, things that perform the various tasks within it. And the possibility of these parts self-assembling by chance is somewhat unlikely. Remember, we made a correction, okay. There are 14 billion years is 10 to the 18th seconds. The number of atoms in the universe, oops, I did it on another slide, is 10 to the 80th, or 10 to the 81st, sorry. That's the number of atoms in the universe. That's a lot of atoms, okay? These numbers, 80, 10 to the 80th means 10 with 79 zeros behind it, or 80 zeros if you go to the 10 to the 81st, okay? And the probability of a self-assembly, this was by scientists, biologists, and mathematicians said it was, the probability is 1 in 10 to the 40,000 power. This is a number that is almost approaches infinity, okay? Because if you think of all the atoms in the universe, that's a big number. And this number is 5,000 times bigger than that.
So how can they believe it? How can they?
Because it's an article of faith. So natural selection plus mutations can contribute to the assembly. Remember, mutations break something, right? It breaks. Maybe you can add another gene in there. It looks the same, but now you got two of the same. You didn't add something different. It can only change an organism already alive. So this stuff about assembly, and you hear about the molecules, natural selection of the molecules. Well, that's hogwash, because natural selection assumes you have something to select, and that means there was differential reproduction. So the only possible mechanism allowable in this scenario is immense time and just random chance. And I mean immense time. Time that we can't even understand. Oh no! But don't ever say it was the designer. Teaching the origin of life. Yes, kids, this is where it all started, in the warm little pond. Okay. That's what we learned. Schools. This is how the myth, it's a cultural myth, is reinforced worldwide. And Christians have just abandoned their role of supporting the Christian faith. Except for some weirdos like me.
I've never taught it that way.
I know.
But
But when you get
never, ever, ever. So
Thank you.
you know, there are a few that break that rule,
That's right. I'm glad to hear that. There are some.
and there are
But
a number of them. I'm sure.
in Texas
God
especially,
only knows.
I can tell you in Maryland it does not happen. I can tell you in 1960 it didn't happen in Maryland. That was a while ago. That was 50 years ago.
Well, the government swallows this Kool-Aid for sure, because I just learned that in VA, they have programs for returning vets who have post-traumatic stress disorder and all this, but they can't talk about God.
You can't talk about God because, right.
Oh.
Like in the AA program, they replicate AA and they pull God out of the program, and that's actually no longer
allowed.
Oh,
Yeah. No, that's our.
So they can taste it.
And AA is pretty you know, the 12-step programs, they have a very vague definition of God. They're just saying it's a higher power, something greater than humanity. Okay, so what's the evolutionary model? We saw the biblical model here about 4.6 billion years ago. The Earth formed. We don't know how. Chemicals formed in our primordial soup. Chemicals bonded together to form organic molecules. Well, if they do things that does happen. Okay, no question there. And God intended chemicals to bond together because that's how they're made. Chemicals bonded together to make a living cell. Here's the big problem. This fourth step here is from chemicals bonded together to form an organic molecule to now I got a living cell. That's a huge leap. So what they say is given enough time and enough energy and random chemical processes, we'll find we will always result in life. Okay, that's the mantra. That's their religion. This is the scientific model. Okay. Just some terminology. If I use these words, maybe you'll remember this. A polymer is a large organic molecule composed of repeating structural units of similar molecules connected by covalent electrical bonds. For instance, nylon. That's a polymer. Okay, and DNA is a polymer because you have nucleic acids, strung together, and a protein is a polymer because you have amino acids strung together. Those are the subunits. Okay, and they're held together not by they're held together by organic bonds, covalent, where they're sharing carbon atoms, sharing electrons. And then we have amino acid. That's an organic molecule containing an amine group. And that's a building block of proteins. Then we have proteins, which is a specific arrangement of amino acids that's a polymer. A nucleotide is an organic molecule composed of a sugar, a base, and a phosphate group. But you hear the word nucleotide. DNA is deoxyribose nucleic acid, and this is the organic molecule chain polymer of nucleotides, right? That on a deoxyribose sugar backbone. So this backbone, and you stick GC8, right? Those. And RNA is very similar, except it has, instead of deoxyribose nucleic acid, it has a ribonucleic acid backbone and with nucleotides on it. So that's when DNA is copied to RNA, the nucleotides match up with on the RNA match up with the nucleotides on the DNA. Here's the Miller-Urey experiment. There was an input chamber, put gas in there, there was a water vapor under a boiling, under a flame. The gas came up, there was a spark chamber, there was sparks that were released into the chamber, and there was a condenser which cooled down some of the gases and the elements, and then it went down into this trap to keep collect the residue, and then every once in a while they opened up the petcock there, and the residue went into a beaker. Now, what do we know about this? Well, they said that there was water, and there was ammonia and methane. It was the atmosphere. And that there was a condensing group. This is kind of like the clouds, right? And then there was a trap. Well, what in nature is like a trap? What's a trap? It was a trap with something so that these gases couldn't leak back into it. Because the gases, there was water in here, okay? The water kept anything on this side from getting to that side because that would actually cause it not to work. But we don't have any traps in nature. The traps we have in nature are called oceans. And you can mix anything you want in there. And what they ended up with was tar, which is poison, and a few amino acids. And they said, this is a model of the prebiotic world in which there was no oxygen. You'll hear it called a reducing atmosphere. That's another word for it. No free oxygen. Well, one of the problems we have is let's grant the evolutionary hypothesis, geology hypothesis, and if you go look down at the bottom of the rock layers all have oxygen trapped in them. So when did this oxygen not occur? Well, it's occurred all throughout the geologic column. So this is a bogus. It's very interesting, but it's not very realistic because they were trying to duplicate the original world set 4.4 billion years ago. And so Darwin postulated the first cell was from proteins and salts in a pond, like this. And Miller-Urey sought a chemical pathway for abiogenesis, right? Life from nothing. And he assumed a primitive reducing atmosphere with no free oxygen. We know that's wrong. Originally he hailed as a success. Now even Miller says it was a dead end. And this forever captured the imagination of our evolutionists, and all the experiments continually seek new pathways. But if all this stuff completely misses the point, what is the origin of the coded information in the cell, which really is the stuff that drives life, not the chemical covalent bonds? So one of the things we find out is life can't start with oxygen in the atmosphere, because otherwise the amino acids won't form. By the way, what happens when something oxidizes?
Rust.
It rusts. That's another way for decomposes, right? Decomposes, rust, decompose. Life can't start without oxygen. We all seem to be using oxygen. The plants and the animals all seem to use oxygen in one way or another. So you need it either for respiration or expiration. So where did life first start? Maybe it started in the sea. Okay, it didn't start in the atmosphere, no lightning in the atmosphere. Maybe it started in the sea, but the only problem, this wasn't supposed to pop up then, but then we have a problem with hydrolysis. And what we know about hydrolysis is that water quickly destroys organic molecules. So whatever organic molecules are formed, the free radical hydrogen and OH molecule, when water breaks apart, it does break apart, the OH, the hydroxyl molecule, will break apart the organic molecules. So you can't really get these long chains, because as soon as you have long chains, we're talking about billions of years, water will get in there and break the chains apart. So as fast as you put them together, water's in there ripping them apart. So that doesn't make any sense either. Here's a real problem that no one ever addresses. Okay? What's the chirality problem? Chiro, right? Chiros means hand. Organic molecules form when in nature, when you form an organic molecule, it can twist two different ways. It can come in two different configurations. They call it a right twist and a left twist, and that depend. And if you had a pure chemical and you shot light through it, polarized light, it would either bend to the left or bend to the right, and that's because of the way the molecules are oriented. It's the same molecule, same chemical number, but it's built differently, so to speak. There are 2,000 plus types of amino acids. Only 20 or so are used by all life forms, the same 20, with the exception of rare few like earthworms, have one more. And living organisms only use left-handed amino acids. Okay? You don't find any right-handed amino acids except when in a life and death situation, cells will create insert some right-handed amino acids into a protein so that a virus can't attack it, because the virus can't recognize the protein now because it's misshapen. Very rare. And all those sugars, the deoxyribose and the ribose, they use right-handed. There's no left-handed sugar molecules. So you've got left-handed, you got right-handed sugars and left-handed amino acids, and all the proteins, all the enzymes, everything is made out of left-handed stuff, except for sugars, and they're all right-handed. But whenever you produce something outside of a living cell, it produces equal amounts of right and left-handed. So now you think about your organic soup and you have all these left and right-handed molecules trying to come together. Well, almost all the time you'll come up with something that won't turn into life, because there'll be a left-handed where there should be a right-handed, and there'll be a right-handed where there should be a left-handed, because they're all jumbled together. There is no way to separate these. So is there any natural process, and people have been looking at this now for decades, that can select, without human intervention, only left-handed amino acids or right-handed sugars? The answer is no. The selection outside of living cells occurs only with intelligent agency, scientists.
But didn't Dawkins also say something about aliens at one point?
Yeah, that's an intelligent agency.
It is agency.
That's, well, he believes that
He believes in a God.
he believes in intelligent design if it's an alien.
Right. Right.
He's on record saying that. Okay. Earth's, here's another problem.
Got it,
Earth's
yeah.
magnetic. We talked about the Earth's magnetic decay. Here's the details. Dr. Barnes in the 70s noted, since that there's a 5% decrease since going back to 1835, and we know in AD 1000 the field was 40% greater, and he proposed a magnetic field was caused by decaying electric current in the Earth's metallic core. Now, if you have a huge thing like an Earth and you have electric current, in basic science, if you wrap it around metal, right, it'll cause a magnet. And if the metal if the core, if the magnetism changes, it'll sustain that magnet. Okay. Calculated the Earth decay was less than 10,000 years, else the strength would melt the Earth. We're talking about billions of years. Geologists say magnetic field is reversed many times. They look at the rocks, and so a straightforward decay of the field is invalid. Now, Russ Humphreys is actually a very famous scientist, and he, Los Alamos Laboratory, he modified Barnes's model for the effects of the liquid conductor in the core. And this is the model that it comes up with, is that here we are now. You can see that there is a real curve in there. It's an exponential curve, and that during the flood, if liquid material flows upwards from this liquid core, it would make the field reverse quickly at the area where the core is moving. Okay, and Dr. Baumgartner, John Baumgartner, proposed the plunging tectonic plates started Genesis flood. Remember the tectonic plates that flood? In which case that would cause the core to circulate, and that would be liquid material. And the plunging plates would sharply cool the outer parts of the core, driving convection. And the reversals would have occurred during the flood year, every week or so, and after the flood, large fluctuations due to things settling out. And the reversals and fluctuations would not halt the decay, they would just, the total field would continue to decay even faster. And the interesting thing is that he used the same explanation to determine the magnetic field of Neptune and Uranus, that no one had ever figured out what it was. And he used this model. And when the Cassini spacecraft flew past Jupiter, out into Neptune and Uranus, that they used Russ Humphreys predicted, based on his model, what the magnetic field would be around those two, and he hit it spot on. And the evolutionary geologists, and physicists, when they calculated it was a million times greater than what was detected. A million times smaller than what was detected. So actually his model has theoretical background. Theoretical proof. And that way, we have an 11-year sunspot cycle, and, well, it's a giant ball of hot, energetically moving, electrically conducting gas, a liquid. So this model actually explains sunspot activity. And the evolutionists eventually came to realize DNA, protein world, was just undoable. It was insurmountable. You saw the probabilities, just couldn't do it. Because DNA requires proteins to express its instructions, and the proteins require DNA information to form. So you got a tight loop here. You can't get one without the other. And the polymerization, the stringing together of amino acids into proteins requires DNA-coded enzymes, which are proteins. Okay, so it's just an impossibility. So evolution has abandoned the DNA protein model of the origins of life, and the DNA protein world did it. Well, now we go to the RNA protein world, and there's a big long discussion in there, and we're not going to go over it. I'm going to give you the summary. Carl Woese proposed RNA as a precursor because RNA can act as both a carrier, right? It's got that chain with the amino acid, with the nucleotides on it, and an enzyme. And he claims that RNA is a self-replicating molecule. It's not really self-replicating because it has to replicate inside a cell. Now, you can get the RNA, if you get an RNA molecule, you can get it to link up, okay? If you do some fancy stuff to it that you'd never find in nature, okay? But it's not so. And current studies focus on evolution, natural selection of the RNA molecule. This RNA molecule reproduce better than that RNA molecule, and it's mostly in mud. Okay, they like the mud thing, the clay thing, and that's natural selection of an RNA molecule. And RNA acts a little different inside clay and ice, so they're saying, well, either the world had lots of clay in it and it was warm, or it had lots of ice in it and it was freezing cold, but they don't know. And RNA is such a weak enzyme that it's a million to actually sometimes a billion times slower than protein-based life enzymes, and it's totally unsuitable for any life process. And the RNA origin of life research is comprised of very complex multi-step experiments that have unnatural conditions, make special provisions to store intermediate results between steps that would never occur in nature. And they arrange steps out of sequence of the natural chemical reactions, and they use highly purified chemicals. Oh, you mean chemicals that are only left-handed or right-handed? And where did we get those left-handed or right-handed chemicals? Well, we get them from chemical plants that are run by what? Random processes? No, humans.
Intelligent.
Okay, so whatever they get is really an intelligent design experiment, because you also have the profs are intelligent, hopefully. And so evolutionists claim the first replicating RNA cells were far simpler than Mycoplasma genitalium. And I want to know, how do they know that?
Yeah.
How do they know that?
That's
Well, because it had to be, because the stuff they come up with is so stupid simple that it's like soap molecules congealing around a piece of meat in your dishwasher. Okay, that's the model that they're using. Soap molecules congealing around a bit of protein. Oh, we call that, what is it, ivory liquid soap? We know that's how it works. But but have you ever seen anything crawl out of your sink? Have you ever seen a new creature crawl out of a sink?
Well,
I'm sorry. No, there have been some things.
Okay.
yeah.
Well, here's something from, and this just explains it's wholly unrealistic, revealing at every turn the fingerprints of intervening intelligence, that is, the experimenters. It's just, and in fact, what they do is they engineer their own ribozymes, their RNA enzymes, and they're engineering them. That's intelligent design. None of this stuff happens by chance. It's never happened by chance. In fact, when you look at this, everything they're doing suggests the only way anything is going to happen is by what? Intelligence. Not just dumb. Oops. The natural selection is a differential reproduction. That's what it is. Okay? Everything else dies except this. That's differential. That's natural selection. It's death. Everything dies except this. and this one reproduces. Well, the RNA molecules are dead. There's no selection. They claim the fittest RNA molecules evolved into simple cell. That's just balderdash because RNA is dead. It can't evolve. It's just a chemical. Now, can it link up with other chemicals? Yes. Does it turn into life? No. In fact, the chemicals it links up with are very, very small as far as RNA. You know, if you take DNA out of my cell and you take one chromosome and pull it out, it's about this long. Okay. They don't get that long. They get very, maybe 5, 10, very small links. They ignore the chirality problem. You saw the chirality problem. You never hear about this in any of these experiments. Okay, never, ever. What's a chirality problem? The left-handed, right-handed. They ignore the magnetic field decay problem, where it looks like organic molecules couldn't have formed 10,000 years ago because of the magnetic field, and there's no theoretical path from RNA to DNA. I mean, we're taking this whole, okay, so now you have this RNA thing that's critter, and now you're going to turn it into DNA critter. Well, how did you do that? We had to start with DNA all over again. And so it's dead. And they ignore the universal protein-based ATP energy. You know that every one of your cells has ATP in it. That's there's a little motor in every one of your motors in every one of your mitochondria that's supplying the energy that runs your body. And every living thing has an ATP synthase system. And besides, many evolutionary biologists just say RNA world hypothesis is baloney. But let's take a look at this. You produce
ATP synthase is a molecular
your weight in
machine that works
ATP
like a
every
turbine
day.
to convert the energy stored in a proton gradient into chemical energy stored in the bond energy of ATP.
There are zillions of these in your body, in your mitochondria. Okay.
The flow of protons down their electrochemical gradient drives a rotor
Hydrogen
that lies in the
ions.
membrane.
Right.
It is thought that protons flow through an entry open to one side of the membrane
This
and
happened by
bind to
accident.
rotor subunits. Only protonated subunits can then rotate into the membrane, away from the static channel assembly.
And this is the
Once the
this is
proteinated
the membrane
subunits
of the
have completed an
mitochondria.
almost full circle and have returned to the static subunits, an exit channel allows them to leave to the other side of the membrane. In this way, the energy stored in the proton gradient is converted into mechanical rotational energy. The rotational energy is transmitted via a shaft attached to the rotor that penetrates deep into the center of the characteristic lollipop head, the F1 ATPase, which catalyzes the formation of ATP.
So you get ADP and a phosphate group turn into adenosine triphosphate.
The F1 ATPase portion of ATP synthase has been crystallized.
Pretty wild, huh? This is all an accident.
Yeah.
It bears the marks of design. If you saw this and it wasn't in a science realm, what would you say about it? Ordinary
Its
person would say,
molecular
this is
structure
your
shows
design.
that the position of the central shaft influences the conformation and arrangement of the surrounding subunits. It is these changes that drive the synthesis of ATP from ADP. In this animated model, different conformational states are lined up as a temporal sequence as they would occur during rotation of the central shaft. Like any enzyme, ATP synthase can work in either direction. If the concentration of ATP is high and the proton gradient low, ATP synthase will run in reverse, hydrolyzing ATP as it pumps protons across
Destroying
the membrane.
ATP. So there's a good chance that if it just occurred in nature, it would have just destroyed ATP. In fact, this is one of the things that kills organisms, is that there are some things
To show the
that
rotation
change
of
the
central
hydrogen
shaft,
balance
a
in your
short fluorescent
mitochondria,
actin filament was
which kills you
experimentally
because it
attached to it.
destroys all the ATP.
Single
ATP.
filaments attached to single F1 ATPases can be visualized in the microscope.
Oh, This is they stuck a
When ATP is added,
protein
the
string
filament starts
to an
spinning,
ATP, and
directly
when you look at a
demonstrating
microscope, you
the
can see it
mechanical
spinning
properties
from
of
the
this
top.
remarkable molecular machine.
Cool, cool, cool. Okay, law of probability. 10 to the 50th is agreed for centuries. If something is 1 in 50th, 10 to the 50th chance, it's not a chance. Okay. A single protein forming of 100 amino acids, remember you got the chirality problem, is 10 to the 191th power. That is so much bigger than all the atoms in the universe. Okay. That's an unbelievable number. A single cell forming is 1 in 10 to the 40,000th. 14 billion years, atoms in the universe. There we go. Ta-da. All the atoms times all the time, and 10 billion tries per second in all the atoms. Again, actually what I did was I miscalculated here. And it would be 10 to the 180th times 10 to the 81. This is squared. I should have squared that number. So it would be a number that is just so huge. So it's actually 1, and this is supposed to be 180. That was a miscalculation. And this should be 10 to the 81st times 10 to the 81st. Not even one protein could have formed in all the evolutionary life of the planet, the universe. So, what's the probability of life? Research scientists, likelihood of life having occurred through a chemical accident is, for all intents and purposes, 0. This guy is in what? What is he? He's a homochiral researcher. What is he trying to figure out? Chirality, right. He said, terrestrial explanations are impotent and non-viable. Dawkins. This is the Dawkins, okay? Primordial soup. Chemistry, won't work. Biology, nope, won't work. Physics, second law of thermodynamics. There's primordial soup. Complexity, always, you take energy in one form, you work on it, and it turns into a less usable amount of energy. Okay, energy cannot be created or destroyed. And we call that entropy. Okay, that's entropy. You work because of entropy, right? Because, the hydrogen ions go down into the little F0 ATP's rotor, and they turn around and they come down to and then they pop out the other side. We can't use that anymore because you've got a different energy gradient. But that's also entropy. Okay. 2 arguments. Okay, what they're saying here is that the scientists say that the sun shining created all this energy that helped life form. And so the 4 necessary conditions are an open system, available energy source, a way to capture and store the raw energy, and an energy conversion processing mechanism. We call that the cell. Okay, that's really the only way that energy can be used to create life. If you take that spark in the milliliter and you zap the chemicals, you're not going to form life because you don't have a way to capture and an energy conversion mechanism. 4 things detrimental to the origin of life: atmosphere, oxygen, second law of thermodynamics, hydrolysis, and chirality. Anyway, the evolution model is somehow that happens, but what we actually say is that there's information. Information has to be added into this model for life to occur. Werner Gitt, who's the director of the German Federal Institute of Physics and Technology, their National Academy of Science, says, researchers have found that they realize that the information in the cell is really the fundamental issue about the existence of life, and that anybody who wants to make a meaningful statement about the origin of life is forced to tell you how the information originated. So if you took all these parts, like all the parts of a Boeing 747, all the parts of a cell, a smashed insect in a test tube, or canned food, all of which has all the necessary elements to create life, what do you get? Well, if you just let it hang around long enough, they'll all decay. You don't get anything. If you add heat to a smashed insect in the test tube, you don't get anything. You get a decayed insect. And canned food only lasts so long, and no one has ever opened a canned food and found a frog in there, or some alien life form. So the second law of thermodynamics creates an improbability. And this is an advertisement for a. Oops, back. It's not actually. Okay, let's do this. Where's my pointer? There it is. This is for that book I'm going to show you. Signature in the Cell. I actually had the opportunity to spend an evening with Stephen Meyer here in Fort Worth. He was a fascinating person.
In 1957, Francis Crick first proposed that chemicals called bases along the spine of the DNA molecule function as alphabetic characters in a written language or digital characters in a machine code. This animation shows how this digital information directs protein synthesis. First, a large protein complex separates the tightly wound strands of the DNA to prepare it to be copied. During this process of transcription, a protein complex called a polymerase produces a single-stranded copy of the original instructions. Here we see this copy, the messenger RNA molecule, being constructed inside the polymerase.
And
These individual bases are positioned and added to the growing strand. Now we see the polymerase in action from the outside as it spits out the messenger RNA transcript. Next, this RNA transcript approaches and passes through a molecular machine called the nuclear pore complex, an information recognition device that controls the flow of information in and out of the cell's nucleus. Now we see the genetic assembly instructions on the messenger RNA approaching and arriving at a two-part chemical factory called a ribosome, the site of protein synthesis. As the messenger RNA transcript passes through the ribosome, the process of translation begins. During translation, a mechanical assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids in accord with the instructions on the transcript.
Here's a new protein being formed.
These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell by molecules called transfer RNAs, which link specific sequences of bases to corresponding amino acids. The sequential arrangement of amino acids determines the type of protein constructed. When the construction of the chain is complete, it is transported to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape required to perform its function.
Only the sugar. Right hand is a good sugar.
Yeah, right. The RNA backbone, the thing that those things are hanging on, is right here.
After the chain is folded into a protein, it is released into the outer cytoplasm to do its job in the cell.
You know, there's all kinds of interesting things out there. The whole world. Here's the Golgi body. So if you're a scientist type, you wrote a book called Signature in the Cell, and it's the signature of the creator in the cell. And it's a very good book if you are the scientific type. Otherwise, it's kind of tedious. But it's causing a firestorm in our science world right
Good.
now.
Good. Excellent.
And one more thing. Couldn't have arisen by chance. The origin of life is a stubborn problem with no solution in sight. Here, this one is the one I like. 30 years, we're no farther along than where we are. Many investigators feel uneasy about stating in public that the origin of life is a mystery, even though behind closed doors they freely admit they're baffled. Because they worry that a frank admission of ignorance will undermine funding. It's all about the money.
Oh.